Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining another session of our Idea Speaker Series. My name is Francis Fong, and I will be your host for today. I am the co-lead on engagement for IDEA, and I'm also the Rehabilitation and Clinical Services National Manager at March Dimes Canada, which is a partner of IDEA. Before we start, I want to give you a reminder that we are recording this session, and the recording will be made available on our IDEA website. For those of you who may not know too much about IDEA, it is a social innovation laboratory focusing on helping creating stronger and more diverse labor markets that includes persons with disabilities through knowledge to practice. And IDEA is the acronym for Inclusive Design for Employment Access. Before we jump into the webinar, I'd like to share a land acknowledgement relevant to the IDEA National Office in Toronto, where the National Office of the IDEA Social Innovation Lab is situated, has for thousands of years been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this land is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity to conduct our work on it. This acknowledgement is relevant to Toronto. However, since we are gathered today virtually, we would suggest that you think of the communities in your respective locations as well. The monthly speaker series serves as an opportunity to hear the latest about current topics in the work disabilities policy arena and learn about activities underway within and beyond IDEA. During today's session, in the last 10 to 20 minutes or so, we will hold a question and answer period. If you have any questions during the webinar, you are more than welcome to type your questions in the Q&A box at any time throughout the presentation. You should be able to find this box on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. Now, our speaker today is Monica Ackermann, and she is a strategic accessibility leader, passionate for creating accessible digital spaces and for the inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of society. In a past role, she has been the head of accessibility at Scotiabank, and she led the Accessibility Center for Excellence there with a mandate to define and implement the strategic vision for accessibility to meet expectations of customers and employees with disabilities, business, as well as regulators. Monica is a professional engineer, and she has a master's degree in critical disability studies from York University. For 20 years, she was the co-owner of a company specializing in workplace accommodations, supporting employees and employers in creating inclusive workplaces. I should point out that she's also a current director of the board at G3ICT, which is the global initiative for inclusive communication technologies and assistive tech, And that is a non-governmental organization that is in consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, and is also a conference of states parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Civil Society accredited organization. So we're really excited to have Monica with us today. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Monica.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here today and just and to be included in these important conversations. I'm Monica. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a white woman with short gray hair and glasses. And I've had an incredible privilege of having an entire career in accessibility, starting as a student in engineering in 1984. So as you can imagine, I've watched a lot of progress. We've come far. We have a lot of way to go. I am going to be looking at my notes a little bit, so you might notice I'm not looking straight at the screen. So Canadians with disabilities have lower rates of employment, higher rates of underemployment, and lower income than people who do not have a disability. So I just want to contribute something to this important and ever-evolving conversation about accessible and inclusive workplaces, specifically around technology, so that we can all work together to reverse those trends. Welcome. We are committed to providing an inclusive and accessible work environment. Please let us know if you require an accommodation. On screen, I'm showing a picture of a woman in a wheelchair reaching out in a handshake to someone else in an office. So these words, these commitments, they're now pretty standard as companies commit to inclusion. But let's imagine you're excited to start your new job. You're either handed your computer in person or as a remote worker, it's delivered to your door. You open the box with anticipation, eager to start contributing and to bring your incredible skills, knowledge, and experience to this company. You've talked to the recruitment team and your new manager about what you need to be productive and successful in your job. Your accommodation request includes print magnification software and text to speech capabilities. You power up your computer and the software's not there. With your sight loss, you can't use this unadapted computer. You call the tech support number you were given. They can't help you. You talk to your new manager. They're flustered. They're not sure what to do, but they're going to look into it right away. One day becomes a week becomes two. You're assured every time someone is working on it. The trust and the goodwill that started in this employment relationship with its commitment to good inclusion is definitely at risk. You wonder, am I really welcome here? Some of you on the line may have experienced this when you started a new job. Some of you working in organizations are trying to change all this. So what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today is how do we change that story? What is the role of accessibility and technology in your employment journey? We'll go through a few of the typical pieces of technology that are used at work and some ideas on how to make accessible. This is not a technical conversation, so I'm not going to be going over, how to change your code. It's more general conversations around those pieces of technology and how we might start thinking differently. And I'd bring in a little bit of some of the evolving standards and regulations around accessibility, and then just leave some thoughts that you can use to develop your own strategy within your own organizations. And of course, a few resources so that you can keep learning. What I'm hoping that you can take away from today is even one action in whatever role you have, whatever skill set you have to make change, or a question that you can ask your own tech teams, or information that you, as an employee with a disability, can use to empower yourself to get what you need at work. So I also like to ground my work in research, in stories of lived experience, and to start really thinking about how principles to inform policy and practice. So in a report published just last month by the Business Disability Inclusion Council called Bridging the Gap, Report on Disability Inclusion in Canadian Workplaces, there were a few things in there, 4 of the 6 recommendations that really resonated with the topic of this presentation today. 1, adopt inclusive design approaches to meet and exceed accessibility standards. Adopt accommodations approaches that offer employees accommodations and adjustments by default. I love this, rather than relying upon disclosure. This is where technology, when done right, can really play a role. Ensure fully inclusive environments throughout the full employee life cycle. And to move my screen here, ensure that any artificial intelligence that used in the workplace is ethical and accessible by design. So, oops, hang on a sec. So what technology are we talking about? Today, I'm really only going to speak about 3 parts of the employment life cycle: recruitment, onboarding, and retention. And that's, your own employee experience. So in recruitment, the public website is your gateway to the company. It's what you do, it's what you believe in, what it's like to work there. Once you go to the career site and you start to click into finding your job postings, you end up in something called an applicant tracking system. That's where your job postings are, and and where you may encounter some of those online skills evaluations. In a lot of recruitment right now, those virtual interviews or the resume screeners are using AI. Onboarding. Congratulations, you've got the job. You've navigated through the hiring process and hopefully not encountered any barriers, and you're ready to start. So what are some of the pieces of technology then? Well, there's definitely hardware, computer or headset, maybe a sales terminal. Software, the image. So are you going to end up with a Mac operating system, a Windows operating system, Microsoft Office, or G Suite? All of those have different accessibility features and barriers included in them. You're going to end up with communication tools like email, phone, video conferencing, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. And there's tons of forms along the way that you're going to have to sign. And maybe that's done through an e-signature tool. There's security and authentication, where you might get a special ID or a special application that you have to go through before you can actually get access to the company systems. Now, in retention, you run into HR management systems. This could include your time management systems, payroll, benefits, performance evaluation. Tons of collaboration tools, digital whiteboards. You might be using Slack or Mural or other type of tool. And then it's outside of the standard Office suite. Each job is going to have its own tools, whether it be a customer relationship management system, project management, or reporting tools. Everywhere we're inundated with digital information. So you'll have information portals or content management systems that have your job aids or other information about your company. Learning management systems with online courses that are either a mandatory part of your employment or a gateway to career growth and continuous learning. Across all of that is the digital content that is part of these communications. It could be an email announcement, it can be audio, video. And then the one thing that I absolutely don't want to forget is your IT support, especially if you're working in something's always got to go wrong. And it's great to have those talented people in IT to help to be able to support and solve those projects. So getting a little bit of a taste, this is an ecosystem of technology. It's not one thing. And there very many are interconnected. And even if they may look like they're all part of the same system, you've got your company logo, you've got your company branding. Chances are there's a lot of different pieces that come from different developers, that come from different companies, that get integrated together. Assistive technology, accommodation, and accessibility, they're related but different. So for most people, technology makes things convenient, but if you have a disability, technology can actually make it possible. On screen, I'm showing a laptop with a Braille keyboard, hardware. The laptop is also hardware, and combined with a screen reader, which is software, enables a person who is blind to navigate, interact with, and produce digital content through speech and touch. Specialized assistive technology like this is usually considered an accommodation. However, providing assistive technology is only part of creating that accessible digital workplace. It only works if the software that you're using is accessible. Otherwise, you're just going to butt up against barriers. Now, one of the things that I think it's important when we talk about assistive technology and accommodation is that according to Stats Canada, many of our employers are falling short in their providing accommodations. With approximately 42% of persons with more severe disabilities and 31% of those with milder disabilities who have unmet accommodation needs. Now, not all of these are technology, but some of them absolutely are. So what can we do? Well, let's talk strategy. Strategy. I took this from the new standard on employment. An employment accessibility strategy is considered a framework of policies and practices that establishes a vision for and a roadmap towards a workplace that is accessible and inclusive by design. What I love, and is the note that gets attached to it. An accessibility strategy is not limited to only accessibility specific policies and practices, but also ensuring that all policies and practices are inclusive and barrier free. And that, to me, is intuitive. The only way to make accessibility part of a culture of an organization is to integrate it into the DNA of how a company operates, to make it a shared responsibility. I'm showing a picture of a person on one side of a chasm, and they're looking frightened because they're trying to reach the other side and the bridge has collapsed. To me, this represents what happens when your accessibility strategy starts and ends in HR. Then your goal of hiring and retaining talent of people with disabilities is going to fail. So this might sound very daunting, can be if you don't plan and if you don't know how accessibility plays into the systems that you use at work. The key is to just get started, start somewhere, make one change, build on that, and take a systems approach. So the first step is understanding. Let's dive in. Okay, so I'm going to take those pieces of technology for recruitment and just talk a little bit about what are some of the characteristics, not the technical details of it, but the characteristics. For recruitment, your public website, your applicant tracking system, your assessment and selection tools, your AR hiring tools, I can guarantee that almost all of those come from different vendors, developers, and different people within your organization actually own them to make sure that they're up and running and working and procuring them. That even within some of those systems, what I've seen over time is some of these larger companies that procure these or that supply this technology, they've also taken different modules from other companies that they have bought. And so what you may have been seeing is that the user interfaces look very different from one place to another place. So what do we want to do? What are some of the accessibility considerations in recruitment? Oops, I just have to move my screen here. If I can see. Oops. First off, know what you have. So if there are accessibility barriers, then talk about them, communicate them, and try and find a workaround. It's better that when someone comes and says, I'm having trouble with uploading my resume to the applicant tracking system when I use a screen reader, it's better to say, oh, yes, we're aware of that, and here's the workaround that we're going to do. It's on our roadmap, and we're going to have it fixed, than to say, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. As you're going through, especially when you're using some of these AI hiring tools, make sure there's really clear processes for requesting and providing accessibility information and accommodations. The best way to do that is to actually integrate it into the system. Perhaps there's a field that you can add to your applicant tracking system that sends you on a workflow that goes directly to get you the answers that you want. Having to step outside of the system and then go to your public website and then trying to find a contact name, those are all barriers to having a positive recruitment experience. Now, when we talk about AI, I'm not going to cover everything in AI. That's many, 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 many sessions. I really encourage you to take a look at the previous idea session by Jutta Treviranus, who talked about the perils and opportunities of AI. But in recruitment, this is something that we really want to look at. So AI depends on a lot of data. and it's highly accurate in the middle, inaccurate at the edges, and wrong at the periphery. And people with disabilities can fall into the margins of some of these data sets, and the small numbers may not be statistically relative, and these outliers can be removed. So that means the data sets used in AI may not reflect the diversity of the lived experience of someone with a disability and can perpetuate historical bias against people with disabilities. AI can be used in resume screening, virtual interviews, job matching, pre-employment testing. And when it's not trained with inclusive data sets, people will be screened out rather than in because of their uniqueness and because they aren't part of that middle cluster. So some video interviewing tools have been shown to be ineffective with certain faces or skin colors, or even when human subjects wear glasses, accessories, or head coverings. This effect is amplified even more for people with disabilities that, let's say, have affect their facial expressions, like making eye contact, voice, such as deafness, blindness, or speech disorders. Okay, so that's a little bit about technology in recruitment. I put up on the screen here just a little example. I went to the McMaster's career site just so you can see the difference of these different vendor pieces. So I'm showing the main website, the landing page of McMaster, and it has a very specific look and feel and navigation. As soon as you click on show me those job postings, you go to another screen that has a different navigation system, different font sizes, different interaction models. So already there, you're asking employees to figure out two different ways of interacting with the technology. Is one more accessible than the other? I don't know. You'd really have to do that evaluation. All right, onboarding. Hardware, software, communication systems, e-signatures, security, there's all this stuff that gets thrown at you right at the beginning. And just to frame this whole piece of the conversation, I heard a statistic about how effective onboarding increases employee retention by 82%. New hire productivity is 70% higher and contributes really in a lot of ways to a sense of belonging. And as the story that I told at the beginning, that sense of belonging gets destroyed pretty quickly if you're not welcomed in through the onboarding process. So what are those some of those functional characteristics? Well, it's very limited hardware options. It's not like you can bring any kind of technology to work. Usually they'll say, here, you get a laptop. This is the kind of laptop. This is the operating system that you get, regardless of what you use at home. It comes pre-configured. I know many of us, when we build our own computers, we're changing our font sizes. We're adding in browser extensions. We're customizing it and making it work for us. We're installing assistive technology to make the computers work better in the way that we need them to work. The other piece is there tends to be a limited set of software that you can get. And it's all very licensed, it's all regulated and governed and very locked down. You can't go on to, or I don't know how many of you, but I haven't been able to just log into my work computer and download whatever piece of software I want. It can't be done. Highly, highly, highly secure. And the other feature about them is that some of the functions and features, including the assistive technology that you get on your home computers, your computer systems, they might be blocked, especially if they have to go out to the cloud for data. You might have a real-time transcription system on your home computer, and companies will lock that down because it's at risk of sharing proprietary information. So what do we need to do to make it accessible? The best practice that I've seen, that I've heard many people talk about, is have your assistive technology ready. any software that gets installed on a corporate computer has to be tested. It has to have proper vendor records. It has to be highly secure. And so if you do all that in advance and you have your catalog, your offerings, and you tell people about it, here, this is what we do. This is what we have already for you. Screen readers, text-to-speech software, tools to support print disability, learning disabilities, hearing amplification tools. Get it ready. Tell people, put it in a document. And this way, it's fully funded. The manager doesn't have to figure out, where do I go to buy it? How do I buy it? How do I fit it in my budget line? And it should be deployed as easily as any other software in the organization. You go to your app store in the company, you say, I would like read and write software to support my learning style as someone with a disability. You click, you go, it's installed. And that really is an ideal. The other piece is we don't do a great job in most places about talking about the amazing assistive technology that's already integrated into our operating systems, whether it's voiceover on Apple products or any of the assistive technology that's available in the Microsoft products. Something that I found in the last position was the folks that I worked with, we spent some time just analyzing all of the assistive technology and talking about it frequently, going to job fair, health and wellness fairs, sending out documents, doing training sessions, because some people may not want to disclose. They may just want to learn about the tools that they have that are available to them, and in that way to create their own technical working environment. Now, in some places, the small and medium businesses are a lot more flexible here because it's much quicker to get software installed. My experience is in a large organization, to bring a new piece of software in, to have it tested, certified, packaged, can take a couple months. And you don't want your employees with disabilities waiting for a couple months to be able to start their jobs. Some of the other things to think about is allow users to create and transfer their personal profiles, customize it. What if you have a shared workstation? How can you come into work every day and not have to start from the beginning and set up the systems to suit you? I have in here, offer different options. That means you have to think ahead to suit individual needs. I'll give you an example. In security and authentication, one of the ways that people can have secure logins is you get a little token of some sort. It's a small piece of technology and it has LED letters on it. And you have to enter those numbers into your computer system. Well, they don't always come with text to speech. The contrast is can be very poor. And it's really difficult to find accessible versions of it. But there's a solution. Often those tokens can also be put on a cell phone and it becomes a software application. Where the barrier comes in there is that you may have a policy that only executives get cell phones and that somebody working on the first line doesn't get a cell phone. So that becomes not a technical barrier, it becomes a policy barrier. So think about that and plan for that in ahead. And the other thing is discoverability. Make it easy to find. Put all of this stuff at the same place that you would tell people about any of the other technology and offerings. That's one of the things that sometimes it can be like, I didn't know that my company did this. And it really opens the door to showing that you are thinking about inclusion all the way through. Next, in the employee experience, HR management systems, they are notorious for having a whole bunch of different modules that it may come from different pieces. So you have to learn different ways of navigating them. And the other piece is that often, like even if they are accessible, which more and more of them are becoming accessible, is it's the employee facing part that tends to be made accessible, but the management and the application and the administration parts aren't made accessible. This makes assumptions that people with disabilities aren't managers, which is absolutely false. So they're third party, they're often customized. Again, different interfaces. Sometimes there's really old systems that are in place. So let's say the software that you need to use for your job is only works on a Windows computer. But as someone who uses VoiceOver on a Macintosh and a screen reader into an Apple products, when they come into the job, it means they might have to learn a new operating system, a new screen reader, and a new job. When internal job applications are built, like workflows, they often use authoring tools. And in my experience, many of these authoring tools do have accessibility built into them. It's just a matter of knowing how to use these building blocks in order to develop an accessible application at the end. When we think about IT support, you call the help desk and you say, my software is not accessible. What answer might you get? Sure, it is. It's been up, it's running, it's been working 24 hours a day. How do you actually design support when someone uses assistive technology? For example, let's say your IT support team wants to take over your screen and there's a button in the middle of the screen and we'll say, click that button. Well, your system's crashed. Maybe with your voice recognition system, you can't activate the button. And so all of a sudden, even that support becomes a barrier for you and you're left on your own. The other important thing is content creators can be anyone in the company. Take learning management systems. So your courses, the people that develop the course may be using a specialized tool that has certain accessibility features, a certain way to turn accessibility features on, but then someone else will do the PDF that gets attached to that document. And all of that gets wrapped and put inside the learning management system to develop. So we just want to have like an ecosystem approach to when we think about technology. This isn't all going to be fixed all at once. So how do you start? First off, acknowledge that there are going to be accessibility barriers and make people accountable for having a place to report them, log them, document them, find workarounds if you can, share them with other people, and then tell people when you fix them. And never wait until the end to add accessibility. I've heard over the years, we'll get to accessibility. First, we're going to work on features. First, we're just going to get this customer relationship management system working, and then we'll worry about accessibility at the end. You're going to increase your development costs, I would say exponentially. You're going to slow down delivery, and you're going to leave people behind. The other is keep your assistive technology current. So you may package everything up and you've got it on your app store, but technology changes so fast. When you do upgrades to your security systems, to your operating systems, also upgrade and test your assistive technology. An easy way to build accessibility into the ecosystem for content is create some accessible templates, whether it's your newsletter that goes out, company newsletter, or your emails, and distribute those widely in the organization. So I'm going to move on a little bit to regulation and standards. And I debated whether I should start with regulation, but I made a conscious decision to talk about it at the end. Regulation can drive change, course correct, and it can signal a future direction. But it can also be very much seen as a minimum, as the floor for what we need to do. Now, I only looked at employment standards in Canada. I did not look at information and communication standards for this whole other bit of research that should be done. Historically, accessibility legislation has placed a heavy focus in employment on the duty to accommodate and less so on integrated accessibility practices. And it's been mostly silent on the topic of employee-facing technology in digital spaces, with companies only being required to make their public-facing websites accessible. So the first employment standard was Ontario. And from an accommodation perspective, it focused on individual accommodation plans upon request. From an information and communication perspective was accessible formats and communication supports, with some leaning towards employee-facing technology when they reference information that is needed in order to perform an employee's job, and information that's generally available to employees in the workplace. From a legal perspective, you can't really interpret that as make your employee-facing applications accessible. Next, we move to Manitoba, and from an accommodation, it's also upon request, and reasonableness is added. And speaking of an accommodation plan, they also, from an information communication, speak to accessible formats and communication supports. And I couldn't find any explicit reference to accessibility of employee-facing technology. Now we're evolving. Nova Scotia has a draft where they also speak to accommodations and add in real-time accessibility services, which is really important. But then they take it a step further, where they start talking about accessibility within employee-facing technology, specifically for recruitment, assessment, selection, and onboarding. So some of the systems that I talked about earlier on, they mention HR information systems or management systems and mandatory documents. So you've gone through your recruitment and you're onboarded, and there's very specific requirements about what the information and technology needs to happen at that point. Three days ago, Accessibility Standards Canada published the employment standard, and they have, again, an evolving landscape of standards where the focus is barrier identification, removal, and prevention, with accommodation being pretty much a baseline. They speak to access to information and accessibility of communications, but then very specifically and in quite a bit of detail, actually, speak about accessibility of technology in the workplace, that they need to be identified, removed, and prevented, not only in new technology, but in current technology. That's really big. And that accessibility be integrated into the lifecycle management of IT solutions. That accessibility features are enabled. So don't turn off the assistive technology features that are built into the operating systems that Microsoft and Apple and Google are all making available. It says organizations should meet information and communication standards for Canada, which is EN 301549. And having worked in accessibility for a long time, this was always a question. Do I have to make my internal IT systems accessible? And the standard says, yes, you do. Has specific requirements around information communication and also artificial intelligence. So you can see we're evolving into a place where accessibility by default, where you don't have to disclose your technology, should be just available, is coming. So let's wrap that all up and take a look at what are some of the pieces about your strategy that you can pull in. First off, include employees with disabilities in the design, development, and procurement of your employee systems. Do a current state analysis. Ask your employees, what applications are you using? Are you experiencing accessibility challenges in there? What is working for you from an accessibility perspective? And as you can see, there's a lot of different systems. You're not going to be able to hit them all at once. Prioritize. Pick some of those high impact ones that all of your employees are going to use, or say 1,000 of your employees are going to use, or a system that people will use every day. Then identify who's responsible for that software, for making it work, for fixing it if it's broken. Test it and create a plan. So current state analysis. Next, your chief technology officer. This is their responsibility. Incorporate accessibility into your employee technology standards and put a focus on user-centered and inclusive design. When software is accessible and easily usable, then everybody's more productive. Create a catalog of all your assistive technologies, communicate it out, put it in your app store, and adopt these accessibility standards in your own IT policies, and provide accessibility specific and assistive technology help, whether that's a second line support or specialized staff assistive technologists who really can help and understand how assistive technology interacts with the tools at work. I reiterated a few times that a lot of these tools, especially when they're employee facing, they're not built in-house. There are companies who specialize in this. It's easier, faster, better maintenance to just buy it, bring it in-house and customize it. So that's where the onus comes on ensuring that those vendors are delivering on the accessibility requirements of your organization. You put those technical and functional accessibility criteria into your request for proposals, into contracts. There's things called voluntary product accessibility templates. And hopefully the vendors are honest in saying, we know that there's a barrier and accessibility issue in this module of the software that you're going to buy, but this is our roadmap to fix it. And then the responsibility becomes of the employer. Well, what are we going to do in the meantime? If an employee has to use this, how are we going to accommodate their job so that they can do this? One of the places that I always start is when I hear about a new piece of software is I go onto their website and I look up accessibility. And generally, especially these HR companies, they have accessibility teams. Go and talk to them. They're going to be pretty honest with you about what's happening. And they're also going to look for your support and saying, you know, when our clients ask for it, then we can push it forward and make sure that it's included. Participating in industry forums is amazing. I belong to one called Procure Access through Disability In. And a lot of companies are there and they're talking about accessibility in the software. If somebody says nobody else has asked for this except you, that is not true. Then tell people about it, communicate. Ensure that people with disabilities get the ongoing training that they're going to need to use their assistive technology as technology advances, as new versions of software come out, as they get introduced to new software in their jobs. And teach everyone a little bit about accessibility so that people that are working in IT understand what it is they can do in order to make things more accessible. And I just want to wrap up by a quote from a friend of mine, Jeff Whistle. He is the CEO of, or Chief Accessibility Officer of Disability In. And he said, where's my little note about that? Yeah. Instead of waiting until all the accessibility issues are fixed before we hire those with disabilities, hire people with disabilities to fix the accessibility issues. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions, your challenges to what I'm presenting here.
Thank you very much, Monica, for such a thoughtful presentation. You cover a lot of ground here. It's so interesting. I've heard something, I don't know how true the statistics is, less than 5% of the websites available out there are accessible. And certainly digital accessibility is something the business need to consider, not for that legal compliance side of things, but you're just missing out so much knowing that there's approximately about 1 billion people worldwide living with disabilities. So such an important topic. I love the point that you made about not adding accessibility later. It's not an afterthought, and how you ended with a quote that enlist the people with disabilities to help you with that accessibility planning. So really, really great discussions here. So just to remind the audience that if you have a question, you can use the Q&A chat box. You should be able to find it in your Zoom platform on the bottom. And I do want to apologize that I forgot to mention that we have French interpretation available, and you'll find the interpretation button also in the Zoom platform. So and if you feel that you can't think of the questions at the moment, if you would like to email us your question, and we'll certainly try to send it over to Monica, and you give us your uh, email as a reply, then we can get the answers back to you if appropriate. So in the meantime, we're going to jump into a few questions. We do have about 13 minutes or so we'll try to answer some questions in 10 minutes or so, and then leave the last few minutes to kind of close up. And I see that you put up some resources on the slide here, which is really helpful. There's a couple of questions related to resources as well. But let me just start with this. I have heard that folks in this area that sometimes they talk a little bit about the legal framework and the technical framework for digital accessibility are not always consistent. So an example would be, sometimes a business may wonder, which particular web content accessibility guidelines criteria may apply to them. And they might think that certain accessibility problems are quite minor and may not be as relevant to their particular audience. So they don't actively kind of work on those things. So what's your experience working with, a larger corporation like Scotiabank, or just in your experience in the field?
Um, I think the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines really is the gold standard. It's also incorporated as one of the requirements in the EN 301549. There are so many techniques on how to make your application accessible. What I would say, especially when it comes to employee-facing technology, is you need to ask your employees how it's impacting. I'll give you an example. There's a criteria that speaks to having alternative text on images. So if there's an image, say, that's essentially used for marketing or for decoration, and it's 4 pages down, like 4 clicks down into an application, and it's not missing out alt text, still needs to be fixed. But it's not as impactful on someone being able to do their job than, I was speaking earlier about the takeover of your computer, the remote takeover. You might get a button on the screen that's actually just a picture. It doesn't have the actual words. And if there's no alt text attached to it, that somebody may never discover it. And so it becomes a barrier right away, immediate. It stops you from doing anything. And so I don't think that you can say one criteria is more important than the other. You really have to take a look at it in the context of the impact that it's going to have on the person using that software.
Right. Thank you. And in your presentation, you talked quite a bit about some of the best practices and suggestions that employers can take as well. One of the questions that we have is, how do you work with leadership who may be unsure or resistant in uptaking any training specific to digital accessibility, just because it's quite specialized?
Um, uh, I think you have to have good context-specific training that resonates with people. and also speak to the fact that it is making your applications better and easier to use for everyone. Um, it can be tough, especially in large organizations where there's so much training that people need to do, mandatory training, legal training, that they're hesitant to have people do more. But I think if you can create a community, if you can show solutions, um, customize your training so that it applies specifically to the task at hand that the person's doing. So let's say somebody is developing an employee facing application and they're using a certain toolkit to do that, then show them in that toolkit how you achieve that accessibility outcome. And I think you'll be more successful. Make it context specific and demonstrate impact. Show people what the impact is going to be, the leaders on the employees, and how it's going to affect their productivity.
I see. Earlier, you spoke a little bit about testing sort of the digital assets, for a variety of assistive technologies, such as screen readers and voice recognition and, those kind of things. I'm aware that there are some third parties, tests that you can use out there that some are free and some may be paid to use. Things like age checkers or color contrast analyzers and things like that. How reliable are these things in your opinion? And do you have any recommendation in terms of which ones may be more credible? Where can people find these things?
That's a minefield there. um, uh, there are a lot of different testing tools that you can have. I would caution. Uh, so using an automated testing tool that takes a look at your screen is going to give you a really good sense of some simple things around accessibility. If something is supposed to be there and it's not, those automated testing tools will tell you that. The limitations are it won't. They're harder to use, some of those little free automated checkers, especially if you're going through a workflow. My experience in especially employee facing applications is you may test one page, it looks pretty good. You move to the next page, and this might be as someone is serving a customer at the same time. It's that transition from one page to the next where things are going to be broken. You're not getting a sense of the entire flow. And so that's where you really need manual testing. You test with a keyboard, you test with a screen reader. You have your employees with disabilities use these applications because they're the ones that are going to show you, yeah, I can do it, but I have to do 17 more steps than my colleague. So is it accessible? I'm not going to make my targets. It's going to be much harder for me to do everything. So that's where you really need to get that human-centered input from your employees.
I see. We have a question about how to set up a committee with people with disabilities to help validate certain technologies. What's would be your suggestions to kind of get started with that?
I think you can go to your employee resource group and ask them. The important thing is that when you are engaging your employees with disabilities to provide input, acknowledge their work. This is extra work that they are doing. This is their expertise that they are bringing to the job. Don't just expect that your employees with disabilities will do this for your company without being recognized in their employment situation. And sometimes people just want to do their jobs. And so they may be an expert in customer service. They may be an expert in project management. Choose and not an expert in accessibility. So there are times where you really should be hiring people with that accessibility expertise, and that ideally someone with a disability, but there will also be people without disabilities. But I think you're going to get really, really powerful insights to be convincing your leaders to do accessibility training and awareness and incorporating it when you tell the real stories of what it's like to be an employee when you're encountering, in an inaccessible environment.
I see. Just to build on that, so if it is governments that is trying to look at technologies that may be for wider use, public, not just for their own employees, and they would like to kind of set up this kind of committee as well,
Mhm.
would the approach be any different?
Um, uh, I, uh, I don't think so, but you have to have multi-sector representation, right? You have to have people with disabilities as end users, people with disabilities as accessibility specialists, technology owners. There's so much information, there's so much complexity in technology that bringing people together with the subject matter expertise that they can fill each other's gaps in, that they can problem solve. I think that is what is really the power of setting up some sort of a committee or a group is um, multidisciplinary, multi-sector, advanced assistive technology users, brand new assistive technology users. I've had the experience with uh, working with someone, let's say, who uses a screen reader, who's an expert, and they can make anything work. And then somebody new that has just lost their sight have a much more difficult time because they don't have the experience in figuring out the workarounds for that accessible application.
Mhm. Right. You talked about keeping, technologies current. You mentioned about attending industrial forums and things like that. But what about like measurements to ensure accountability? How do you set up accessibility KPIs and track progress to senior management in terms of making advancement in digital accessibility related to user experience and human-centered design?
Mhm. Um, Maybe I can just start with one little piece, like a metric for onboarding. How long does it take you to onboard an employee who has requested an accommodation? That's a simple metric. I think if you looked at it, you'd be surprised at how long it actually took. Um, the other is if you people with disabilities are incredible problem solvers and are constantly doing it all the time and are managing or finding problems and talking to their friends, talking to their colleagues, just kind of fixing them. When none of that gets tracked. And so set up a system where people can track and log their IT issues, their accessibility issues. Encourage people to log it. Actually, look at those logs, and then action them, because then you're starting to get visibility into what are the accessibility problems. It's like, well, nobody's complained. It's like, well, actually, many people have complained. You're just not tracking it anywhere. So that could be a couple places that you could start looking at how accessibility impacts your employee experience.
Right. So we have a very enthusiastic group of audience. There are still some questions, unfortunately, that we don't have time to get to today. I would invite those who posted the questions to send us an email with your reply email address so that we can forward that questions to Monica and get back to you. Unfortunately, we're close to 1 o'clock. So I want to thank you, Monica, on behalf of IDEA and all of our audience for presenting and answering some of the questions and all the resources as well. I also want to take a moment to thank our French interpreter Michelle for helping out today. For the audience, the recording will be posted on our website. That is be www.vraie-idea.ca. And we will be taking a break during the holiday season for our speaker series. So our next webinar will be on January 31st, and we're going to have some presenters from Realize. And so please do sign up and join us. In the meantime, like I said, do reach out to us, and the email address, just for the record, is info@vraie-idea.ca. And let us know how you feel about future topics as well if you're interested. And follow us on any of our social media accounts too. And once again, Monica, thank you very much for the session. I wish you happy holidays and happy holidays to everyone that is attending today. And we'll see you in the new year.